Hi, welcome to the fourth session. And in this session, we are looking at public policy, or since we are into human rights and humanitarianism, term them as human rights problems or issues. And you have the readings, but also more readings and a few supplementary videos have been provided in your Moodle uh, page, so you can visit there and check it out. So in this session, we would like to appreciate and recognize the different public policy or human rights problems, or those humanitarian concerns that require policy interventions. We also want to appreciate the value of defining a policy problem, but also the nature of the problem in terms of complexity or simplicity or complicatedness or chaotic. We also want to know who participate in policy problem definition. Of course, at this stage also we have different actors who are trying to frame the problem from a policy perspective. So we would want to look at those. So this is the reflection again. Even in the previous session, we looked at this, where I would implore you um, to think again or to reflect on the idea that you've witnessed a particular problem and you think the government must intervene. So, therefore, qualifying it as a problem or issue. And we won't go much into defining the problem because we've been talking about this several times. So, again, any decision made by government to either act or not to act in order to solve any or to provide a solution to any problem, that makes it a public problem. And therefore defining policy problems are just abstraction from the problems of situations. So in other words, they try to bring about a particular problem environment in a simplistic way, to have it as a defined uh, issue that requires a particular problem, uh, therefore reflecting some kind of value judgment in terms of what it is, according to whose perception or perspective. So defining a public issue as a problem or not depends on the perceptions or even interests of the people who are participating in trying to define it, whether it is public uh, from a bottom up perspective, or whether it is the elites or institutions or government officials from a top down approach point of view. So definition of it as an act of collective conceptualization of a problem and the solution thus would mean policy problems to be construed as socially or politically created, socially in terms of public, uh, or politically in terms of officials or institutional definitions. So we could say that there's no objective or scientific problems, uh, but rather subjective or contextual. Context in terms of politics, or context in terms of social, or context in terms of economic, or if you will. So again, context and perceptions also matter in terms of they are fundamental in terms of definition of policy problem. So who defines the problem then? So for public policies, of course, all government levels may mobilize to define the problem, depending on different levels and depending on different bureaucrats involved, or politicians, or public administrators. Yeah, so the problem could be defined by professionals, including academics or consultancies or companies or interest groups, in terms of how they view or perceive a particular problem and its impact on the public. But the issue would be on who has the power to at the end of the day define a policy problem. So that's the biggest question here. So in other words, who do we pay attention to define a public problem? Again, all actors, whether official or unofficial, whether informal, within informal institutions or formal institutions, must be heard. Mm, if they are not, or if they are not involved in the definition, then the problem could become ambiguous, or it might lack or become unclear, and therefore leading to uh, wrong formulation of a problem or defining it. So at least it is important and key that all stakeholders, or those who have interest, those who are who would be affected by any policy, would participate in defining, would participate in defining, defining the in the process of defining the problem at hand. So, for instance, you could consider scrutinizing both official and unofficial problem perception, or hidden policy problems, because in any public arena, there is what we call public problems and hidden problems, or hidden transcript, that even when problems are there, sometimes the problems are defined differently by particular groups, not within the public arena itself, but in unofficial or hidden spaces. So it becomes important that all actors are involved. By all actors, I mean those that the policy problem affects, or those that, if the policy is made, would affect. So, example one: try to find a policy problem for why there are high maternal and child deaths in Uganda and other developing countries. So now it depends on, is it the person from World Health Organization who is defining it? Is it from the women's perspective? Is it from the public, the maternal health service providers perspective? Is it from the parliament who? So just fix yourself in one of those spaces and then try to think about it as a public problem. So remember, stakeholder perceptions are key in defining the problem. So that's why I'm saying that whichever position you position yourself, uh, depends on what that particular actor does, or how the problem influences them. Okay, so that becomes an issue. So which actor can you consider to define the policy problem then? Another example could be, try to think about a city situation or sanitation in the city. Why do garbage collection sites, dumping sites, or trenches in Kampala city become full, not cleared, without stinking smells, even when we have KCCA, or Kampala City Council Authority, in charge of collecting those? What about traffic jam in the city? What about street children in the city? All those are public all those are problems, but do they mature to be public problems that require a policy solution? So think about it as just position yourself in any actor role, and then think about it whether you think this should be a public policy problem or not. So which actor can we consider to define these problems in this case? Should it be KCCA? Should it be the government? Should it be Ministry of Transport? Should it be uh, the public itself, the road users? Uh, which one? If it is about the street children, should it be parents? Where do they come from? Should it be the city center? Who is responsible to define this? So definitely, whoever is affected by any of these problems has a role or key role in defining the problem, because their perceptions differ. So let's just have a key look at human rights issues and violations, because those definitely mature to be referred to as public problems, which can later be defined um, as public policy issues. So human rights are violated in almost all countries, regardless of the international or national laws. Uh, you could take a look at the Human Rights Watch report 2019, and you'll see how different human rights are violated in different countries. So it's very key that you just take a quick look at it. Or you could watch uh, this story of human rights to see how you may define particular issues, or whether it would influence your perception on some human rights. And of course, some of the issues include conflicts which lead to loss of lives, resources, refugees, and displacements. And of course, for instance, there you could have policies that deal with, handling of migration and resettlement of refugees in particular places. You have natural disasters. Think about the Bududa, for instance, landslides. And other categories of disasters that have happened that lead to loss of lives and refugees and displacements. Again, think about poverty and its dimensional impact on social, economic, and political aspects of people. Think about famine and hunger, and how that turns into a public crisis and therefore requiring government intervention. Think about Ebola and health, for instance, Ebola, HIV, AIDS, or malaria, or even COVID-19 now, which has become a global crisis. Think about literacy, then housing and shelter crisis. Um, think about environmental or climate challenges that lead to disaster, and other categories of human rights. Okay. So some of the key questions that we may ask ourselves when we're trying to define problems as public issues, or humanitarian issues as public policy problems. We would ask ourselves, for instance, why should we get concerned, um, or who should get concerned about such a problem, or when should we get concerned to have it as an issue that is of significance to be addressed by the government, or what should we get concerned about regarding that particular problem? If it is health, so what? If it is conflict, so what? What would it result into that would impact on the general public? Or how should we respond to it? Should it be through policy or through other measures? So these are some of the key questions that one may reflect on while trying to to define a problem as a public policy problem. So there are many humanitarian issues or human rights issues or problems that are sometimes neglected, and the list of most neglected displacement crises can be found in DRC or South Sudan or Central African Republic, Burundi, Ethiopia, Yemen, and so on. You could find more of these in on these websites. Let me see if we can watch one and see if it's so you can say, of course, some of these this report was put out. The video reflects some of these neglected issues in the past few years. So while some of these are a little bit changing, most of them are still existing. So and they are being reported. So these are crises that are being underreported or neglected, and so that itself defines why. The question is, why is it that these do not make it to the agenda or the list of those crises that should be addressed through public policies? Of course, the governments within these countries themselves should have alternatives to these problems, but of course there are many factors that limit them from addressing them. So, so in that case, the biggest question would be, why do some humanitarian crises get more attention than others? Or, of course, why is it that some issues make it the agenda setting and others do not? So, of course, this question would be mostly also addressed in session 6 on agenda setting, but some of the reasons why some crises don't get attention, uh, could be that, of course, there is lack of political will. Armed parties on the ground to protect the rights of civilians, level of international action. The international actors could not be willing to act upon that, or lack of economic support or media attention, because media plays a very big role in problem identification and agenda setting, and of course bringing attention to the public and other actors, or physical distance, close or far from responders, e.g. Syria crisis, or it could be that all other alternatives are failing even when they try them, for instance in Yemen. So you could also watch this uh, these videos or website, and check out the dangers of ignoring humanitarian crisis, or why some humanitarian crises don't get attention, uh, or not to be defined as public policy problems. Yeah, of course, one of the main issue of of defining problems as public policy problems is that problems are not just some problems are simple because they are known, while others have the unknowns, which are complicated, makes it complicated. Others are complex, while others are chaotic, that they do not even have one way of viewing them or perceiving them. So that makes problem definition uh, difficult. Okay, so if we look at it from the systems theoretical approach, and of course there is a Sinfin framework by Dan Snowden, which categorizes these to four ways or five ways of looking at problems, or when one is defining problems to find solutions or make particular decisions. And of course he gives one that is obvious, which is simple. In that case, the relationship between the cause and effect is very obvious and everyone knows it, and that's why here we say it's known unknowns. It's known knowns, because the cause and effect are very uh, obvious. So in that case, you sense a problem, categorize it, and respond to it. Yeah. But then there is complicated, which is the second level, where the relationship between cause and effect requires analysis and some other form of investigation, so that you have more knowledge about it. That is why here we say that uh, complicated, you have some known unknowns, which you need to do to get to know more through research and investigation. And in that case, you can sense, analyze, and then respond to 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 the problem. And then we move to complex problems, where the relationship between the cause and effect can only be perceived in hindsight. So in that case, you have the unknown unknowns, and it is difficult to attach or attribute a particular effect to a particular problem. So you have, for instance, a crisis that is happening, but you don't know whether it is being caused by disaster, or neglect of government, or lack of initiative by the affected, or conflict itself, or so it becomes complicated to attach a particular effect or cause to a particular problem. And in that case, you need to do some more probing or deeper investigation and get sense of the whole situation, and then you can be able to find some solutions. But of course, even solutions would be attached to particular aspects, while others still keep accruing from other factors that influence that particular problem. And then there is the other level of chaotic problems, where you have relationship between cause and effect at systemic level, at system level, where there are many different facets of the environment, or facets of governance, or facets of different contexts affecting the or causing the problem, but also resulting in different categories of effects. So in that case, you can act. So in this case, they do much more of action research, where you act and then sense if there are changes, and then you can respond and then do action again. So this is how we can look at the problems. And of course, here you have some of the examples by Wesley Zimmerman and Patton in 2006. For instance, under simple, let's take one example or two. So you have baking cake. The recipe is essential, and of course but the recipes are tested to assure easy replication, and of course so it is very simple to know how to do a cake, because the recipe can be generated by any person, and then you have it and then you replicate that. But under complicated, let's say sending a rocket to the moon, it's a rigid protocol, or formulas are needed. Research must be done, and then after researching, you test after testing to see that the success will happen. But when it comes raising a child, that is a complicated, a complex problem, because there is no protocol or recipe for raising a child. Children are different, parenting is different, the environment within which they grow up is different, factors affecting their growth is different. So that is a complicated issue. There is no where you can have a paper where they say, okay, if you want to have a successful child who will become an engineer, you must parent them like this. So that's how we also view public problems, that they vary from simple to complex to complicated to complex. And therefore, the more complex they are, the more difficult it becomes to find them from a policy perspective, or finding policy alternatives that would fit them as solution. So of course, again, Stacy Ralph provides another matrix which adds to Zimmerman's or Snowden's identification of the problem levels. So for Ralph, we have this intersection of certainty versus consensus when it comes to identification or defining problems. So if actors are trying to define problems, then we can measure the level of consensus and certainty. So you have the simple ones. Consensus is while consensus for simple, while defining the types of problems, if the problem is close to certainty, and also close to having many actors accepting that surely is how it should be defined or perceived, then that makes it simple, because everyone can be able to tell that, okay, this problem is like this and it is certainly going to happen. But when we try to move far from certainty and consensus, we tend to get the problems become more complicated. And of course, as we move far from consensus or certainty that the problem is definitely that, then it becomes complex. And the far we go from all actors accepting that one issue as a main problem, or the certainty that it is going to happen, that makes it disorderly, because at the end of the day it is difficult for, it is difficult for each of the actors to specifically define that particular problem based on the perceptions and how they are experiencing it. So, therefore, public policy problems are wicked, if we may say that. They are wicked because their complicatedness and complexity is so wide that it becomes very difficult for one to say, okay, this is how it is, or this is how it is. Just think about it. There's no recipe that is straightforward, that this is the actual solution to this public problem, or for instance, that this is the actual and only solution to addressing hunger or famine or conflict or anything sort of. So they are wicked and complex. So of course, so in other words, making problem definition and structuring and decision making rough and complex in that case, because of that particular wickedness of the problems. So rationality, judgment, and complex decisions have to be made to solve the problem, and that is why when later on we shall see, when we get to agenda setting and policy analysis, you'll find that uh, the actors try so hard to rationalize all possible angles towards trying to solve the problem. So making all those different judgments within the policy arena. So you have again, if we may reflect on what we just talked about, so you have levels of wickedness, so problem type, and then type of definitions and decisions to be made. So within the simple, where we know everything, how things go, you have rational or simple definition of policy problems, but under complicated, the level of complicated problems, judgments must be made, because critical assessments and decisions in defining the problem must be made. Some research is needed, and so on. Under complex, many definitions are there, many decisions are there, and there is no, for no specific problems, because the problems are also many, but also accumulating to other problems. So one problem leading to another, and then another leading to another, and therefore you find policymakers trying to define one, but in a complex system, and therefore making it difficult to define a certain problem. Okay, and then under chaotic, of course, we don't know anything in that case, so no applicable decisions at the time of problem definition. So particular actions must be taken to see if any changes happen, and then a problem can be defined from there. So again, types of decision making. So you have under simple problems, you have rational decision making. For complicated, you have political decision making. And for instance, where you have where consensus is high and close to certainty is low, you have political decision making. But where certainty is high and consensus is low, then you have judgmental decision making. So you judge according to how certain you are that something is going to happen or something is causing a particular issue. But under complex, where you have high consensus and high certainty, far from consensus, then you have where you have high level of that is of being certain that you that a particular issue is not going to happen or something of the sort. Then you have complex decision making, and where you are far from consensus by different actors about defining a particular problem, and you are also far from certainty about the agreement or about the problem itself, how it is happening. Then you have uncertain decision making, because definitely you don't know whether the problem is going to be solved, or even whether that's the cause or not. So in the policy arena, therefore, you have many actors, and they all influence how particular problems would be identified. So the policy arena is the policy context in which crucial interaction take place between the different policy actors, and of course these are determined by several factors, but mainly the logic of the state, whether it is democratic or dictatorial. If it is democratic, then it allows participation of all different stakeholders. But in a dictatorial regime or dictatorial logic of the state, then most of decisions are made by the government institutions, but of course also influenced by the elites. So you could reflect back to the models and theories to figure out what we are saying here. And then, of course, the state of the arena influences yeah, the state of the arena influences how the policy problem is defined and by who. So that's why I was referring to the democratic or or dictatorial, or whether the institutions will take more charge, or whether the public opinion, or whether public opinion would be more respected in that case. So top down versus bottom up approaches in defining the problem. So actor category and then the description. So you have the political and administrative actors, those who are vested with public authority to take decisions, and then you have target groups and end beneficiaries of the policy if it happens. So including those target groups, the actors whose behavior is politically defined as the indirect cause of the problem, or who are able to take action to deal with it, and also the end beneficiaries of the policy if it happens, or actors who experience the negative effects of a particular problem, or and whose situation should be improved following the implementation of a particular public intervention. And of course, you also have the third parties, who may include um, uh, think tanks or private companies, or so any of those that have that either positively affect the policy, or negatively affect the policy processes in that case. So all these are categories of the actors, but of course we are going to have a look at these actors in another session in details. So who participate in the arena? Of course, the ideal. This is the ideal, not reality in most cases. So the idea is that policy actors in the arena are defined by public nature. But of course, all that we're saying that the ideal is that we have the officials and unofficials, and the officials include the three arms of the government, and then you have the unofficial. So in reality, all these are supposed to be acting on any public, on finding any public problem. But of course, depending on the nature of the public problem, also depending on the logic of the state, to whether it can allow other actors to operate, that itself influences who will participate in the arena to define the problem as a public policy problem. So this is the ideal, but in reality, things are different. And of course, specifying the problem. So when a problem has been identified, it is not yet a policy matter. So until it is until its issues for policy are specified, and of course the issues refer to the stakeholders' concerns or political disagreements or value conflicts or interests, name all those aspects that would influence one's perception on the issue. So to recognize the issues, you might think about impacts of the problem, who or what is affected by it, or conceive the problem narrowly or broadly. So is it individual or local or more widespread? So in terms of scope, scope of impact, whether it is geographical, widely affecting a particular bigger group or specific groups of people within communities or within the public, or conceive it broadly and then narrowly. Is it widely distributed, or it's concentrated within particular areas or on particular groups of people? So it is very important, because if you are not clear on that, then that would affect on how you would later on find the alternative policy solutions to that problem. Also think about the attitudes. How do different stakeholders perceive the problem, or what values, ideas or beliefs or assumptions are expressed in their definition of those. So the attitude itself towards the problem influences how it would be defined. Also think about the authority. How many stakeholders want to address the problem, or do they see the government action as a solution, or there are other solutions to the problem rather than the government coming in? Yeah, we've always had this statement of in the Uganda language, I mean, tusaba government etuyambe, but does it necessarily mean that for every particular solution, problem, the government has to come in to intervene, or there are problems that are not for public intervention, especially if they are not affecting many, majority of the population? And of course, do they agree or disagree on government's role? So all these are how you could look at these issues. So bottom line, okay, think about the impacts of the problem, think about the attitudes or perceptions, and then think about the authority that is responsible for addressing such a problem. So we shall look at these in details in sessions 5 and 6, where we're looking at agenda setting and policy analysis. So you could create a few groups and then have a good discussion for further learning process. You identify any public issue of concern, or a humanitarian concern issue, or human rights concern, and discuss whether your problem is simple, complicated, or complex, or chaotic, and how. And then discuss how different actors may problematize uh, uh, this issue and why. And then, of course, remember each actor may have different perceptions about the issue at hand. So it's very important that you also take into considerations all those different perceptions by different actors. Each group will present to each other, and other groups can as well participate as actors to discuss presented issue. So that's it for this, and thank you.